So this is an introduction to the three aspects of Latin nouns: case, number, and gender. Along with the explanation of gender provided by the video from Latin tutorial, this should be all you need to understand how these three concepts work. We're going to try to understand these concepts by looking at the vestiges of them in the English language. So, nouns in English. What is a noun? Noun is a person, place, a thing, or a concept. A noun can be proper, like Mike, or Mexico, or the Rosetta Stone, or Manifest Destiny. Or it can be common, like shoes, a field, a ball, or freedom. So, very basic thing to understand. Nouns in English often have a grammatical aspect called number. We have two numbers in English. We have one person, and we have lots of people, singular and plural. We use the singular when we're talking about one person, place, thing, or concept, and we use the plural when we're talking about two or more entities, when we generally have a singular form and a plural form for our nouns. But the way a noun goes from singular to plural in English isn't always predictable. We generally add an S to a singular form to make it plural, just like when we make dog into dogs. But sometimes we drop Y and add IES, like lady and ladies. Sometimes we add ES instead of just S, like bunch and bunches. And then, of course, we do crazy things like say moose and moose. English is confusing for sure, but one thing is pretty consistent. Since verbs also have number, we'll get to verbs soon. When we make a noun the subject of a verb, we change the number of the verb to match the number of the noun. So, when I say, my friend is nice, I make the verb singular, is. But when I change the subject to my friends, I have to change the number of the verb to the plural, are. This is a really important thing to remember since Latin does the same thing with its nouns and verbs. So that's number. Let's talk about gender. Old English, the English spoken by people living in the early Middle Ages, was an inflected language. Old English speakers declined their nouns and adjectives, and part of the declension was the aspect of gender. You will have already watched the video from Latin tutorial that talks about gender, but to review, gender has two aspects to it: grammatical gender and natural gender. English has vestiges of both types of gender. Grammatical gender is when a noun has a gender even though what the noun refers to does not physically have a gender. In other words, it's not a man or a woman. People will sometimes say, she's a fine ship, when they see a very nice ship, but there's nothing about the ship that makes it feminine. It's just, we imagine that ships are feminine for some reason. When we sing God Bless America, we say, stand beside her and guide her. We're referring to America, our nation, as if she were feminine, even though there's no inherent reason to do so. So that's grammatical gender. English also has natural gender, and we have retained more of that in our language than grammatical gender. Some of our pronouns still have masculine, feminine, and neuter forms, she, he, and it, for example, but our nouns do not have natural gender, really at all, and our adjectives don't even have number, much less gender. We can say child or doctor or bird, and there's no way to tell if we're speaking about a little boy or a little girl when we say child, or a female or a male doctor, or a female or a male bird. In Latin, virtually every noun has grammatical gender, and many nouns have natural gender as well. Adjectives must agree with their nouns in case, number, and gender, but we'll get to adjectives later. So that's gender. So what is case? Well, like gender, English used to employ a case system that is almost entirely gone. The only vestige of our case system is found in our pronouns and a few of our relative pronouns. So what is case? Well, a noun has case if it changes its form based on how it's being used grammatically in the sentence. So a few examples in English will help us. In the sentence, he loves Stacy, the pronoun he is inflected so that we know that he, whoever he is is the one who loves Stacy. He is in the subjective or nominative case. In the sentence, Stacy loves him, we inflect the word him to show that this guy is receiving the action of the verb. He is the one being loved. Him is in the objective or accusative case. We don't make a distinction between a pronoun that is direct or indirect object, so we don't change him when him is suddenly the indirect object. This is something that Latin would do. But we do change our form again when it functions as the possessive, so we say his instead of him or he when we say Stacy is his girlfriend, which means Stacy, hopefully he doesn't think that Stacy is his possession, but we are using the possessive in this case. Without our pronouns, we would have almost no idea how to understand the concept of case, because all the rest of our nouns don't do this. We use word order or we use prepositions to signal how a word should be understood in relationship to the action of the sentence. So in Latin, almost without exception, nouns decline. So nouns have case, number, and gender. There are a few indeclinable nouns like nikel, the word for nothing, but these are rare exceptions. If a noun does decline, it always has gender. It never abandons this gender for another gender. There is no gender bending involved. In other words, if you see a word in the dictionary listed as neuter, like the word donum, you know that donum will always appear as a neuter noun. It will never stop being neuter. There may be a corresponding feminine and masculine noun, such as deus and dea, god or goddess, or dominus and domina, a master or a mistress. But it's better to think of these as two corresponding nouns and not as two versions of the same word. Something like actor or actress, masseur and masseuse we don't often use, but those are a male massage therapist and a female massage therapist. So we get a lot of those kinds of words in English from French, which is a language that has gender for its nouns. So we understand the idea, but we don't have very many examples of it. So perhaps the most important thing to note when it comes to nouns is the relationship between gender and declension. A declension is a grouping of nouns that tend to have similar ways of ending. If a noun is first declension, for example, then we know that it will end its nominative singular in a short a, and its genitive singular will end in a. The sound a, ae. Many nouns in the first declension are feminine, but that doesn't make the first declension a feminine declension, and more importantly, it doesn't mean that those endings a, are feminine endings necessarily. They are not feminine endings per se, but first declension endings. As far as the 5 declensions of Latin go, the first declension contains mostly feminine, some masculine nouns. The second declension contains only masculine and neuter nouns, and they have distinct forms, so that's good news. The third and fourth declensions contain a mix of all three declensions. Of all three genders. And the fifth declension contains all feminine nouns, except for the word for day and midday, dies and meridies. So a declined noun will always have these three aspects to it: case, number, and gender. And understanding these three aspects of a noun will help you to understand how the noun functions in the sentence and which other words in the sentence it agrees with or connects to.